Hey, what's up everybody? My name is Onepeg, and in this video we're going to cover everything related to the Wizard. We're going to cover gearing, team play, solo play, and spell considerations. Now in this guide, I just want you guys to realize that this is how I play it. There are a lot of different ways to play each and every class. You don't necessarily have to follow this guide step by step, but for me, as someone that's played this game for now a couple of 100 hours over the last 4 playtests and ended up kind of breaking this game to the community back in September, it's one of those classes that I have gravitated toward, and between this and the Cleric have played the absolute most. There are a lot of different spell options, especially now with the buff to the knowledge stat of the Wizard, which I will get into in a moment, where you have a lot of diversity. But for those of you just starting out, this is what I believe to be the most straightforward Wizard build. The Wizard is a glass cannon. If you check out their stat sheet, you can notice here that they don't seem to have a really good, even-keeled stat allocation. Every class gets 75 points. In this case, we only get 5 points of strength because we don't have a very big HP pool and we're not really doing a lot of melee damage. We have some agility, which makes us have a little bit of good run speed. We have a good amount of will, and our knowledge is buffed now from what used to be 12 points up to 20. We also don't have any resourcefulness, as this stat controls how fast we interact with our environment, like opening chests and putting down campfires. This stat here is one of the most lacking, if not the most lacking, of all of the classes, and gives us incredibly slow interaction speed. So we have the ability to cast some spells, but at the start, because our will is relatively low, they're not going to be very devastating. They don't do a whole lot of damage, so we really need to focus on building up these two stats, will and knowledge primarily. Wizards do get some interesting perks and skills. The skills located down here on the bottom section and the perks located up top. Now obviously this is subject to change because we are still in an alpha testing phase and the game hasn't really gone to an early access period yet and won't for several months, the target being the end of April and early May. Right now the leveling kind of goes quickly. You have the ability to level up a wizard or any class really in this game relatively fast. It only takes maybe an afternoon, maybe 6 to 8 hours to level a character from level 1 to level 20. Every 5 levels you see here that we get additional perk slots that are available to us where we can pick from this library, ultimately being able to choose 4. The skills are twofold. We have the ability to meditate, where if you hit Q inside of one of the instances, you can meditate back some of your spell charges. The other being spell memory, which gives us the ability to allocate spells on these spell wheels. First, we'll take a look at the perks. The first perk that we get automatically when we start a brand new character is Mana Surge. We also have the perk Arcane Feedback, which gives us 1% spell haste and 1% damage increase to arcane spells. Arcane primarily just being magic missiles. The other one is Arcane Mastery. This increases the damage of our arcane spells by 5% and reduces the casting time of arcane spells, again magic missiles, by 1 second. Next is Fire Mastery, which increases the magic damage of the fire spells by 5% and increases the duration of burn status by 2.5 seconds. We also get Ice Shield, which increases our armor rating by 20 and inflicts frostbite when we get hit by a melee attack. Melt, which is magical fire damage to a target, reduces their physical reduction bonus by 10%, reduces their armor by 10%. Quick Chant increases our spell haste, our casting speed, by 10%. Reactive Shield activates an arcane shield that lasts for 3 seconds if you get hit. The arcane shield absorbs 10 total damage, and the shield only reactivates after a cooldown period. Last but certainly not least, we have Sage, which increases our knowledge by 10%. Because of the buff to knowledge that we recently got, the perk of Sage is relatively useless unless you decide that you're going to get rid of Meditate and instead take Spell Memory 2, which would give you a second spell wheel and some additional utility should you so want it. However, I would recommend against doing this because when you're just learning how to play this class, 5 spells will probably be enough. Quick note on campfires. Rather than using meditation, which is a 45-second cooldown and takes about, 10 seconds or so to meditate up a few charges of each one of your spells, you can use a campfire instead. However, the use of campfires does take a lot longer to set them down, and you are vulnerable for a significantly longer period of time, which also means that you will have to more adequately budget your spell cast because, again, you only have a handful, 2 to 5 charges of each spell. Now on to our spells. By default, this is the spells that the game will start you with. You have Fireball, Slow, which slows a target's movement speed by 40% for 2.5 seconds. Haste, which gives you 14 action and move speed percentages for 11 seconds. Notice it no longer gives you haste. Spell haste is no longer a thing that's added to this. Invisibility, you have the ability to become completely invisible and gain 10% move speed for 3 seconds. So you can haste yourself for 14% move speed, and then invisibility gives you another 10%, so a 24% increase in move speed. And then last but certainly not least on this list is Magic Missile. 10 homing missiles that deal 12 damage each as a base amount. From here, you also have the ability to select from these spells. Zap, which does magic damage and burns the target for a second. This is also augmented by the Fire Mastery skill. Light Orb, which puts out a sphere of light, does no damage, but will bring rogues out of hiding. Ignite lights your weapon on fire, gives 5 additional magic damage and burning enemies when they hit. So again, this is augmented by the Fire Mastery perk. Ice Bolt fires a bolt of ice that reduces the target's movement speed by 15% and does some magic damage. Lightning Strike counts 4 seconds, it says. It's not really 4 seconds, it's more like 2. But does a bolt of lightning in a targeted focused area that deals spell damage. And then last but certainly not least, we have Chain Lightning, which electrocutes a target within 4 meters and then bounces up to 3 times. So it's your initial target plus 2. It does not transfer to the target it was transferred to if it was already hit once, so it won't bounce back and forth. And if you are close enough, it will transfer that damage onto yourself. There is no loss of damage between targets, so it will hit all of those targets for the full amount of damage that the spell does. For me, as a wizard, this is the spell allocation I would recommend. Instead of using slow, I would highly recommend instead taking Ignite. The reasons why are as follows. Whether you are solo or not, you have the ability to cast haste on yourself or a party member. You can invis yourself or a party member for engagements. You have the ability to fire magic missiles at a target, which is augmented by haste and spell damage. The missiles will come out faster. The missiles will fire out of your equipment like a machine gun. Consider it the difference between using like an AK versus a Chris Vector for those of us that play Tarkov. You have a 600 RPM versus a 900 RPM firing rate. The more spell haste you have, the faster the missiles come out, which is ideal when you're trying to knock down your targets. You don't want to really give people an opportunity to get away. And then last but certainly not least, Fireball. The amount of zone control that is generated from fireballs along with the burn ticking damage generated by Fire Mastery as you level up ends up working out extremely well. Does very, very good damage. Most targets, most people, if you are able to hit the ground around them or hit them with a direct shot, will end up taking 2 fireballs at most and they'll die. There is something here for honorable mention of the 2 spells, well 3 spells really, between slow, Chain Lightning, and Zap. Zap also gets the ability to benefit from Fire Mastery because it does fire damage. The Chain Lightning, if you are able to use that as an initiator, if you end up hitting a group with Chain Lightning on the onset, the bouncing lightning damage will end up softening up your targets pretty significantly. You can chunk them for 1/3 to 40% or so of their HP pools if they're able to bounce to all 3, especially if they're lumped up. It does very, very good damage to a relatively wide area. However, you also run the risk of not only hitting yourself, but also your teammates, and you really don't want to end up chunking your teammates out and killing them. Finally, slow is amazing for melee characters that are trying to rush you down. The 2.5 seconds doesn't seem like it's very much, but it takes about 1.5 seconds to fire up and ready a spell to cast on yourself or on others. So by creating a little bit of space, you have the ability to slow someone, haste yourself, invis yourself, and get a really good amount of distance where they don't know where you are at the time. Works out very, very well in most circumstances. As you are leveling up, this is the way that I would go about playing this class. The initiation arc kind of goes as follows. If you are by yourself or with teammates, depending on who's doing the initiating, in a lot of cases what you will have is either you get jumped or you're doing the jumping. Whoever's opening the door, you end up hasting them so that they can then open the door. And the moment that they get the door open, the melee class that's going to go in, if you're playing with a fighter or a barbarian, for instance, you then invis them right away, because then they get the run speed benefits of both the haste and the invisibility. Plus, in this case, while you can hear footsteps of people approaching you, they can't see you. And in a lot of circumstances, there's already so much going on, they don't pay attention to the footsteps that are coming up behind them. So you have the ability to get a very, very solid engagement going right away. For yourself, what you want to do is cast haste on yourself, then cast ignite on yourself to ready your weapon, and then invis yourself so that you can run up and approach someone else. Depending on the engagement, it also may be beneficial to try and do some zone control. So you want to ready some fireballs and try to send them down hallways, or use some death from above tactics. Try and get above your target so that you can fire down at them and hit the floor. Think of it like playing old school Quake, where you're firing rockets into the ground in and around around your enemies so that they get hit by, at the very least, the splash damage, rather than trying to hit them in the chest, where you could potentially whiff and have the fireball go sailing by doing nothing. At worst case scenario, they will take ticking damage from the fire that they're then ignited by, therefore, chunking away their HP pool that much more. A good example of this is this play, where we as a team heard that there was another team inside of this boss room. I used haste, invisibility on myself, ran around behind this person after hopping over one of these sarcophaguses, invisible, got in right behind them, and then just magic missiled them in the back, sent them flying. Also, in most engagements, when you're playing in team play, if you're readying fireballs, at least for me in comms, I always mention to people or try to call out fireball, fireball, fireball. That way my teammates know to try and move to the side or get out of the way. Because the last thing that you want to do is cause splash damage to your own teammates. And by the way, friendly fire is an absolute thing. You will definitely end up hitting your buddies. There is also the possibility of you taking a calculated risk, which is the other guy, the enemy, has less HP left than your friends, or your friends have more magic damage mitigation, more magic resist than they do. In which case, you could try to gamble a fireball, but in a lot of cases, sometimes, that gamble is a bad idea. Like right here, where I ended up hitting these guys, one of which was Sacriel, and Sacriel ended up taking half of his HP as a fireball hit. And the other guy, while he did die, Sacriel also went down, leaving me to then try to pull some shenanigans, which is what I'll get to right here. Another very solid tactic to use when you're a mage, and one of the strongest things that you can do as a mage, is to utilize the use of a rondel dagger and a crystal ball. Wizards have 4 items that allow them to be able to cast spells when they hold it. And by the way, in order to be able to cast spells, you have to hold one of these items in your hand, otherwise you won't be able to cast any spells. They are the wizard staff, the crystal ball, the crystal sword, and the spellbook. The crystal sword typically has the highest melee damage of all of the different items, but it ends up having this large flourish type of moveset, where in order to be able to cast a spell, you have to bring it around the front of you and then point it at your target. If someone ends up bodying you hard enough, they can actually clip into the sword, which will kill the casting animation, and now your spells don't fire anymore, leaving you to try to melee your target instead. It also doesn't hit very hard when you're trying to break barrels and whatnot. The other item that you can use to cast and also melee with is the wizard staff. While this will break a barrel or boxes open with 2 hits, it also has the issue of a long cast animation and a very wide cast animation. The animation in this case is overhead, but if you're sitting in tight tunnels or standing in door frames, for instance, you can end up hitting the door frame or hitting the ceiling of these small tunnels, and it will stop your cast animation before it even begins. The other 2 options are the crystal ball and the spellbook. The spellbook doesn't have the ability to hit anyone or anything. You can only cast spells with it, but it does have a very short cast animation and a very, very tight one. You only end up extending out your hand in front of you, and while if you do have your shoulder, I guess, up against a wall, you can interrupt that cast animation, or if you hit a door frame with your hand, for instance, but it has the least likely, I guess, opportunity to have that cast animation interrupted. The 4th one, the crystal ball, has the unique benefit allowing you to hold a rondel dagger in your main hand at the same time that you're holding the crystal ball, which in my opinion gives you the largest benefit. Oh, and one other thing. The wizard staff and crystal sword don't give you any additional magical damage. However, the spellbook and the crystal ball both do. In the case of the spellbook, it's an additional 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 additional magical damage built in based on the quality of the item, going from gray to epic, or legendary, unique even, I guess. Each quality seemingly giving it a base point of magical damage in addition. The same thing is the case for the crystal ball, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 additional damage based on the quality of the item. But the real beauty of this build comes into the ability to enchant your own weapon with Ignite. See, if you hold the crystal ball, you have the ability to not only cast spells, but you can also use the dagger as an offensive weapon. So if you ignite your dagger, you can do some pretty unspeakable damage with it. In my current build, given that I have plus 35 will, 25 knowledge, this gives me the ability to, and with additional magical damage on most of my gear, gives me the ability to enchant this dagger to where the ignite damage, in addition to the base damage of the dagger, is hitting people for over 100 damage per second. If you consider, without mitigation being involved, that I only have a 96 damage health pool, by stabbing someone, if it were me, if I were able to stab myself in my own face, that single hit would kill me. And this is far from an optimized build. However, I do want to speak about stat allocations very briefly. When it comes to stat allocations, wizards are most dependent on will and knowledge, but there are some additional secondary stats that seem to matter an awful lot. 1 point of will gives 2% additional magical damage. If you notice right here, I have +1 all attributes shoes. If I take them off and go to the class pane, you can see my magical power bonus is 58.9%. If I put these back on and go back to my class, you can see it's now 60.9%. So 2% additional damage is given per point of will. However, there are things like magical damage bonus, which give a flat percentage increase. So you have to weight the amount of will that you have on items compared to that of magical damage. There is also the benefit of plus true magical damage, like you will see on here on these mystic vestments, and additional magical damage that you can see here also on these vestments. Additional magical damage is exactly what it says, +4 points in this case, but that is mitigated by magic resist. True magical damage cannot be resisted. So the largest benefit that you will find in most cases will be plus will, plus percentage magical damage, and above all else, plus true magical damage. However, if you end up getting a necklace like this, for instance, you probably don't want to throw that away because +3 to all attributes matters an awful lot. Overall, the best stats that you could possibly try to gear for is plus all attributes. The reason being that things like agility, while not looking like they're that great on the surface, gives us additional run speed. Things like strength give us additional hit points, which for a wizard just starting out, when you have 75 hit points, there's a big difference between 75 and 96. And while we don't need knowledge for spell allocations, knowledge does give us spell haste, and haste is amazing. That's cast time, that reduces the amount of time that we have to spend meditating, and it reduces the amount of time it takes to get all 10 of those magic missiles out of our hands. And while resourcefulness is probably last on this list, having additional action speed so that we can open doors faster or open chests quicker matters an awful lot, especially when you're trying to loot up items in addition to 2 other teammates that you have running around also absorbing up everything like a cracked out Hoover vacuum. Insofar as leveling up, as you're leveling, this is how I would personally prioritize my perks. At the beginning, for me, arcane damage from magic missiles seems to be the bread and butter. That's where you end up getting the majority of your damage output at the start. Well, between that and ignite. But the ability to cast arcane spells a little bit faster matters, to me, matters most over anything else. This gives you a huge casting time reduction. That 1 second is a huge difference and ends up being, personally for me, the prioritized item that I would put in my very first perk slot. The second would be to try to buff up the fireball and the ignite a bit more. Give yourself the ability to have a little bit more ticking duration and damage associated with all of that fire that you're putting out. So the second perk that I would have is Fire Mastery. Third, I would do Quick Chant. Again, spell casting speed, spell haste is everything. Getting out those spells a little bit faster matters an awful lot. And last, I would take Mana Surge. A flat damage bonus, 5% additional magical damage is an awful lot of magical damage. There can be something said here for the use of Ice Shield or Reactive Shield to save your butt a little bit more by giving you some more armor points, and that slow on hit is also kind of nice. It ends up making you a little bit more distance in that case. If you are able to get yourself pretty geared out, perhaps then getting rid of Mana Surge would end up doing you better, or if you're able to get a lot of haste, a lot of knowledge points, or spell casting speed, perhaps then you could get rid of Quick Chant and just kind of like even that out for the addition of something like Ice Shield. I personally would take Ice Shield over Reactive Shield because I think the armor rating would and the slow would end up benefiting you more than a flat 10 damage with a cooldown, and I probably wouldn't take both unless you end up kind of being a built-up juggernaut, and maybe then you could get rid of Mana Surge and Quick Chant for the, I guess, damage mitigation. But for me, over the last 150 hours or so of Wizard gameplay, this allocation seems to have served me best. If you're just starting out and you're trying to gear a wizard for backup sets just so that you have a little bit of better advantage at surviving or a little bit more damage output and you don't really know what to buy, this is what I would recommend. There are 3 items that you can get off of vendors that even at gray quality still give you stats. They are padded leggings, rawhide gloves, and mystic vestments. If you notice, the Mystic Vestments, even at gray quality, give you 1 point of will. Padded Leggings at all qualities give you 1 point of will and 1 point of knowledge, and Rawhide Gloves give you 1 point of will and 1 point of knowledge. So between those 3 items, you get an additional 3 points of will or an additional 6% damage output, which doesn't sound like it's a whole hell of a lot, but it actually ends up adding another 2 points of damage to each of your magic missiles. So if you're able to hit 10 magic missiles on a target, that's an additional 20 damage, not including the headshot bonus. That actually ends up being a pretty considerable amount of damage. At gray quality, if you can find a merchant that is selling it at the time, for instance, like these heavy leather leggings, if they were rawhide gloves, let's say, you would be able to buy an unlimited quantity of them for about 8 to 10 gold apiece. The same is true for the tailor with padded leggings. If you can find gray quality padded leggings that are usually in this like upper left-hand corner, they'll let you buy an unlimited number of them. So you don't end up running out. You can buy 4 or 5 pair for just handfuls of gold and set yourself up with additional backup gear that will still give you a few points. So that way, rather than starting out with gray items that have no stats on them at all, you have the ability to go in with a few extra points of will and a little bit more damage, and a little bit more buff duration. At the end of the day, though, just like everything else when it comes to Dark and Darker, the name of the game is trying to choose your battles. Dark and Darker is a game of being able to outplay your opponent just based on tactical ability. In most cases, it is based on decision making, as opposed to whether or not you can outflick your opponent like you'll see in things like shooting games. Usually, it's the decision to engage or not engage that allows you to survive and get out with stuff. So as I always say to people, make sure that you pick your battles wisely. Try not to gamble too much, and you will end up ultimately making yourself rich over time. Wizard is not an easy class to master, but I personally believe if you end up putting some hours in, you will be as feared in the dungeon as, well, I guess me. So that's what I've got for this one, guys. I'm sure that there's going to be people in the comments that are going to talk about how much they love Chain Lightning and some of the other spells, utility spells, and for the reasons that they've chosen to use them. The best part about this game is that no one build is better than others as long as people are able to play them well. Probably the reason why I like this game as much as I do. But for me, the stat allocations that I've chosen and the spells especially that I've gone with have been extreme strengths for me, and right now I can't see a reason to replace any of them. Well, maybe if I get a little bit stronger, I could see a reason to replace some of the perks, but the spell wheel, for me, those are irreplaceable. I've found amazing utility in all of them. Oh, I guess I did forget to mention that Fireball will also break down doors and blow open chests, unless they're like the big metal ones. So, yeah, there's that too. Have fun with it. Anyway, guys, that's what I have for this one. Thank you so much for coming and checking it out. If you would be so kind as to come and follow me at twitch.tv/Onepeg. I'm live every day around 6 to 7 a.m. Eastern Standard Time. Consider following me on my socials at OnePegMG on Twitter and at OnePeg on TikTok. And as always, if you would consider subbing the channel here, I will be forever appreciative. Thank you so much for lending me your eyeballs, and I will see you in the next video. Peace.